Arizona PBS is proud to support Indian Country Today. For 6 decades, we've provided television programs and now digital content. But we go beyond that, sending outreach teams across Arizona, offering workshops in language and literacy, family engagement and community outreach, and supporting tribal communities with early learning and school readiness resources. Join us at azpbs.org.
This is Indian Country Today.
Esquili, yes, thank you for joining us. I'm Patty Thalahungva. Here are the headlines from Indian Country Today. Deb Haaland makes her first appearance in Utah today as Interior Secretary. She's traveling to San Juan County, and she will hear from tribal leaders and other stakeholders about the fate of Bears Ear National Monument. Secretary Haaland will also travel to Kane County, home to part of the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. Her trip comes in response to President Joe Biden's executive order for a review of former President Donald Trump's controversial move that stripped 2 million acres from Utah's 2 large national monuments. The order also asks Haaland to provide recommendations regarding management and boundary revisions. Alaska says it's taking over management of its waterways from the federal government, and that complicates the co-management of scarce resources by Alaska Native communities. Governor Mike Dunleavy is accusing the federal government of ignoring state rights and delaying transfer of title to land under navigable waters to the state. That despite a U.S. Supreme Court ruling in Sturgeon versus Frost 2 years ago. For the past 7 years, the Intertribal Fishing Commission has had an agreement with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to co-manage subsistence fisheries for Alaska Native villages. That commission is made up of 33 communities on the Kuskokwim River in southwest Alaska. The commission's managers work with the federal managers to figure out when to open and close fisheries to make sure enough fish continue up the river to spawn, while also providing food for the villagers. The co-management structure would come to an end if the state of Alaska is successful taking over management from the federal government. The U.S. Departments of Interior and Agriculture and the statewide Alaska Federation of Natives had no comment on the governor's announcement, but the action is not likely to be the final word in this debate. The town of Martha's Vineyard is being ordered by Massachusetts First Circuit Court to work with a tribe that wants to build a bingo hall. Residents have packed meetings to raise opposition to the plan by the Wampanoag tribe of Gayhead. Casino.org reports the tribe lost its federal appeal after petitioning the court for an en banc review, which would have included every judge on the bench. The tribe will go forward with its plans to build a 10,000 square foot bingo hall. Bingo games are considered Class II gaming. Under the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, the Wampanoag are able to operate Class I and Class II gaming. The court also warned the town to not impede the tribe as it builds its Class II casino. And finally, the court warned the tribe has a right to sue if they are wrongly treated by city officials. The Cherokee Nation and the Oklahoma Air National Guard are building 21 homes for Cherokee veterans. It's part of the Cherokee Veterans Housing Initiative and the Readiness Training Program in the U.S. Department of Defense.
1, 2, 3, turn third.
We know construction will start right away. In fact, efforts have already been underfoot by the Housing Authority, which is a key partner in this with the Innovative Readiness Program. And so we're breaking ground today, but we're also surrounded by all the materials that are getting ready to go in the ground for the infrastructure. This is going to be a project that gets moving quickly.
And this is a wonderful example of how the military and the civilians can work together to help out a good cause.
The housing project will be named in honor of the late Cherokee Nation tribal counselor, Midge Glory. He served in the U.S. Army after being drafted at the age of 18. A group home serving Ainu youth in Quebec, Canada, is being investigated for human rights abuse. Quebec's Human Rights Commission is looking at allegations of neglect and racism at the Pavilion Richelet group home. The home is more than 240 miles northeast of Quebec City in the northern region. Nearly 40 children live there. Many are Ainu youth between the ages of 5 and 17. An extensive report published in the La Duvet newspaper triggered the investigation. In the story, current and former staffers allege overcrowding, a lack of being educated, and in some cases, children sleeping on mattresses on the floor. And former employees and family members of youth residing there told APTN News that staff will not let them speak Ainu. The commission is not granting interviews on this case. As more people get vaccinated against COVID-19, tribal businesses are starting to reopen. In Albuquerque, New Mexico, the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center is reopening today. The museum, courtyard, and store will be open to the public Thursdays through Sundays with limited hours of operation. The Pueblo Cultural Center earned a New Mexico Safe Certified seal from the state, and this means it will follow the governor's public health ordinances, which include limited capacity, timed entries into the museum, and plenty of hand sanitizer stations. And those are the headlines from Indian Country today. I'm Patty Thalahungva. When we come back, how has the coronavirus pandemic affected your tribe?
A year into the coronavirus pandemic, we are seeing changes in the way healthcare, education, and businesses operate. Carina Dominguez takes a look at how those sectors have restructured and the effects on Native communities.
The emotional and physical impact of this, we're just starting to see right now. And I think it's going to be months, if not a couple of years, before we truly get a full handle of the impact of what COVID has had in our Native community.
There's been a massive shift in the way healthcare is delivered to patients due to the pandemic. But Dr. Lyle Ignace says it's also brought out heroic efforts by healthcare workers. At the beginning, healthcare providers were scrambling to find personal protective equipment. The next challenge was getting testing capabilities. Then it was developing an entirely new system to begin contact tracing.
You truly get an understanding and a deeper respect for individuals who've gone the extra mile in not only establishing and setting up an entirely new parallel system of care and treatment.
Some of his concerns center around chronic care disease management and the early detection and prevention of cancer.
That is going to be difficult to catch up, and we'll lose time. We'll lose time. We've lost a year of people's time for that early diagnosis and prevention of any cancer screening.
Dr. Ignace says there's more hope now with numbers trending downward for Native communities, but says the biggest issue is the mental health impact. He recommends staying connected to the community and safely participating in ceremonies.
But I'm more optimistic now than I have been over the past year. Especially, you can start seeing the light at the end of the tunnel with the introduction of 3 different types of vaccines.
He says another major concern is school closures and Native youth losing out on a year of learning. Many families had issues with reliable internet access, even if that wasn't an issue. Some parents, like Sierra Wolf Ballantyne, say her son struggled to adapt to remote learning.
That was hard, seeing him go through that. He would cry. I mean, every morning for about the first few months was just tears were shed, you know. It was very difficult for him. And he's definitely regressed.
She's a stay-at-home mom and bought additional school books to supplement Aiden's learning.
It's been a tough year. I think everybody can relate, especially when you have little ones.
Aiden couldn't wait to get back in the classroom, and Sierra felt comfortable sending him with the safety measures in place and more people getting vaccinated.
I feel that the kids have all regressed a little bit, you know. With remote learning, not everybody has parents home.
Some parents worked remote alongside their kids. Some had essential jobs that couldn't be done from home, and many others lost their jobs. Ben Jacobs is the co-owner of Tokabe, a contemporary Native American restaurant in Denver. Before the pandemic hit, Jacobs said the restaurant was doing great and sales were up during its usual quieter months of January and February.
Mid-March was when it just all crashed. I mean, it came down really instantly is what it felt like, within days. We went from kind of normal business to getting a little quieter to just like non-existent ghost town.
The business wasn't able to make payroll and had to lay off most of its staff.
We were frustrated at first, legislation being passed so rapidly, and making sure that we were following proper protocol, or which one we'd go after. Do we go for the PPP? Do we go for the EIDL? Like, what are we going to go for?
Business owners saw some relief from the Economic Injury Disaster Loan and the Paycheck Protection Program, but there were some concerns about eligibility requirements. Many big businesses with savvy accountants swooped up the loans before the small business owners they were intended for could. Jacobs said they were looking for any amount of funding at that time to help gain the proper footing.
From our standpoint, there was no catching up. We were to the point that we were probably within a week or two of really just like shutting down our original restaurant because it was so far gone at that point.
Tokabe went from 15% takeout pre-pandemic to 100% once closures hit. They observed CDC recommended safety measures once they could reopen their doors. Having moral support from the national and local communities meant a lot to Jacobs and invigorated his motivation to keep the doors open.
Like, that was a really humbling experience to know that, the efforts we tried to put in over the last decade were meaningful to people.
Jacobs, Dr. Ignace, and Aiden's mom, Sierra, all say it will take some time to recover from this pandemic. In Phoenix, Carina Dominguez, Indian Country Today.
The National Center for Education Statistics reports that 36% of Native students did not have internet access in their homes, compared to just 18% of their peers nationwide. The Center for Indian Country Development at the Federal Reserve Bank in Minneapolis says that disparity is even more pronounced on tribal lands, where only 61% of households have broadband access. In comparison, 70% nationwide have access to broadband at home. When we come back, the fight to keep Native languages thriving. But first, Rochelle Adams from the village of Fort Yukon with a special thank you.
Masi Choanjit, Indian Country Today Akin Al-E. And that means thank you for watching Indian Country Today.
Alaska is home to more than 20 indigenous languages, and some are threatened. It's being called a crisis, and now professors are demanding action across universities in Alaska to save these cultural treasures. As Stewart Huntington reports, to support Alaska Native faculty and students. When
I speak my language, my heart is really happy.
6 years ago, 20 Alaska Native languages were named as co-official state languages. But scholars say the languages need a major university investment to help them survive.
We are past the point of a crisis. We are way past that point. And it never should have gotten this bad.
Twitchell and his colleagues on the Alaska Native Studies Council are calling for the creation of a College of Alaska Native Languages to issue degrees and certify teachers. Without it, they say, the languages will continue to move towards death. And they want more support for Native faculty and students.
Most universities are still very racialized structures, and they struggle with understanding or even supporting not only the faculty, but our curriculum and even the students.
The result, say the professors, is that students suffer.
We only graduate about 10% of our Alaska Native students. That has been consistent forever. And that's a problem.
The university says it's listening.
That is clearly a question of equity.
In January, the university launched the Alaska Native Success Initiative with the goal of improving Native educational success and representation throughout the three-campus university system.
We need to take some steps to address some of the issues in our system with regard to inequities in terms of our faculty hires, our student enrollment, our staff, and some of our academic programs.
Layer says that the Success Initiative teams will weigh the scholars' plan that they recently promoted with an online celebration of native languages.
Dr. Hune, is this our first official Zoom Alaska Native Language Party?
I believe so, which is great.
Danaka Hedo Hedega means I'm learning Danaka language.
At a Gulgod, one heart, we are of one heart.
Gamshku Tuk Kringangu. And that means don't hate each other.
And Kutikada is like, I'll see you again. Be healthy.
Just put kindness and love in your heart. And that's really central to the language teaching that we do.
That's all embedded in the language. To learn the language, we learn more about our deep meanings of the culture.
And that cultural connection, say the professors, is central to boosting student success, which all agree is the ultimate goal.
We've done studies in the past and we have come up and we've looked at those statistics in the past, but never really producing any measurable change or measurable programs to implement. And so this one, we'd like to think is going to be different.
Stewart Huntington, Indian Country Today.
The first draft of a 5-year plan is due to the university's Board of Regents in June. Keeping native languages alive is one thing. Documenting native languages is another. A new documentary looks at the extraordinary life of an eccentric ethnographer. The producer-director of Chasing Voices joins us today. Daniel Golding profiles the life of John Peabody Harrington. Beginning in 1907, Harrington crisscrossed the United States, frantically searching and documenting dying Native American languages. For the next 50 years, this became an obsession. Harrington amassed over 1 million pages of notes on over 150 different tribal languages. Some of these languages were considered dead until his notes were discovered. Welcome, Dan.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to share my film.
This is exciting. Let's take a short clip and take a look at one of the clips.
J.P. Harrington was a one-of-a-kind American ethnologist and linguist.
His transcription of native words is extremely accurate.
The recording machine was a very top secret type of thing.
None of us had any idea what the extent of that documentation was. But as soon as he died, we began to find out.
How did you just come about this story?
You know, I was involved years ago with language. I wanted to do master apprentice language learning to speak my language from my Quetzal language. I was doing that master apprentice stuff, and during my learning the language, I came across Harrington, who had written documented our creation story from a man named Joe Homer back in like the early 1900s, 1907, somewhere in there. And so I just kind of researched him a little bit, and I was kind of fascinated by his story. I thought it was just this really kind of interesting story of what he had done, and the fact that nobody has really ever heard of him. You know, he's this eccentric linguist ethnographer who documented all these different languages, over 1 million pages of notes on over 150 different Native American languages. And all these notes are sitting in the, in the Smithsonian, and, the fact that tribes can access them and be able to, use them to revitalize or rebuild their languages was just, an interesting thought to me in a story. So then I was just like, well, maybe this is my next story.
Well, you think about the challenge of language revitalization, and you really have to start with some sort of record, particularly in places where there's just not a volume of language speakers.
Yeah, and it's I think my tribe, Quetzal, we're pretty lucky in the sense of we still have fluent speakers left. My dad is a fluent speaker who never taught me how to speak the language, but because of what he had to deal with growing up, but and my aunts and my uncles also speak the language. But I, in doing the research and working on this film, I found that there were tribes that had no speakers left, and that they were really, really working hard to try to rebuild their languages and stuff. And Harrington's, work really was the link to bring back those languages, and we talk about that in the film a little bit with, the Sani Ynez Band of Chumash, and and their work with rebuilding their languages based on, only solely Harrington's notes. And in his notes have been used in other ways too, right? For documenting sacred sites, or tribal recognition. I think some tribes have used his notes to help them regain federal recognition. So there's a lot there, and I think there's so much there. It's just going to take, it's such a big collection, I mean, just to go through them and stuff like that. It's painstaking at sometimes.
Language is always changing all the time, and to have this record of what it was at a certain point in time could be incredibly useful.
Language isn't stagnant. Even today we're dealing with how do we, as Native people, incorporate new things into our language, such as, the word for computer, or social media and things like that, because there wasn't a word. And so language is ever evolving, and even in the learning of it, right? So, I always hear, like, when people say, well, there's an old Quetzan, or there's this way of speaking Quetzan, but maybe people today wouldn't understand it or really recognize it as being Quetzan, or it's different because they don't speak it like this anymore. So using those notes, I think, really, and I think one of the great things about Harrington is he was just the master in writing down languages as he heard it. And so when he's writing language, it's all conversational stuff, right? So it's all the little nuances of the language that he's putting down on paper, writing it down as the person's speaking it in a, phonetically, and in a way that is, accurate, that people can pick up on those little nuances of language. So it's not just vocabulary, it's not just, verbs and plants and things. It's actual conversation, and I think that's probably one of the biggest keys for rebuilding the language. You have all those things.
Well, you think about a film like this and a story like this, and it actually could get people excited about engaging in restoration of languages.
I hope so. I think that I've been involved with language revitalization for myself for, gosh, it seems like forever, like 20 years, and it's a dedication, right? You have to be dedicated, and it's important. I always say that, my dad and my aunts, who are fluent, who learned the language as a first language, view the world differently than me, because they view the world through their language, and they see things and interpret things differently. And I think that's the power of our individual native languages, right? And I encourage everyone to, make an effort to try to learn a little bit of your language, and and do it, because it's such an important part of who we are as Native people, and how we can regain, or reconnect with who we are from things that have been taken from us. It's all there. We just got to go out and get it and rebuild. And I think language is probably the key. I mean, it's just an empowering thing. And I teach my kids, I teach them now, and so they're speaking the language as well. So it's a journey, but it's a lot of work, but it's rewarding.
As you were researching this film, what surprised you the most?
Wow, I think there was there was always, he was such an amazing and interesting and eccentric character. But I think there's a couple things that kind of amazed, that was surprised about him. And I think one was his relationship with Kroeber, who was another anthropologist who did a lot of work. He's famously known for discovering Ishi, but him and Harrington had a really confrontational relationship. But I think the other thing too is, Harrington wasn't a perfect character, right? He had his problems, he had his faults, and some of those faults were pretty serious faults, in terms of racism and things like that. So I think that's, some of the things that I was really kind of surprised about in Harrington.
We just have about 30 seconds left, but I want to find out how people can see this film.
Well, this film is, it was funded through Vision Maker Media, and also had some support from different tribal organizations or tribes, and it's going to be aired on PBS starting April 30th. So nationally on PBS. So it would be good to check your local PBS listings to see when it's playing. So I'm really excited to finally see that it's getting out there. It's 10 years in the making, and I'm excited to see the story get out there, and people can utilize this and see a little bit about Native America that is often not talked about, and that's important as a Native producer that we do that. So
thank you so much, Dan.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. Thank you for watching. We will be back with another edition tomorrow. I'm Mark Trahant.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.
Indian Country Today is produced at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communications at Arizona State University.
This is Indian Country Today,